It's Friday, and it's another edition of the Zogby Report. Real and unscripted, as always. How are you doing this week?
I'm good. How about you?
I'm doing well. I'm John, incidentally, and that's Jeremy.
Refreshed.
Yes, refreshed, and you're going to talk a little bit about it later on.
Yeah.
Okay,
I got some more insight.
There are so many things to talk about, so many things flying. I'm just walking from the car here into the studio. This is what struck me. We had primaries here in New York.
Yes.
And in the most immediate, biggest takeaway was on the Republican side in battles for Congress that Donald Trump's candidates did quite well in upstate New York. Even in our own district, the brand new New York 22nd, a young fellow by the name of Steve Wells spent a fortune, over $500,000, and lost his seat to someone who doesn't even live in the district. A very successful fellow by the name of Brandon Williams, but he won by 16 points and barely spent any money at all. And then, of course, there was a huge victory for the Democrats, perhaps a bellwether, in the seat that has been held by Antonio Delgado, right near us. He was now, of course, the lieutenant governor of New York. But this was a battle between two county executives. Mark Molinaro, who's a very well-known name, been around for a long time, a Republican county executive in Dutchess County, which is considerably bigger than Ulster County. That's where Mr. Ryan is from, the Democrat. Bottom line was conventional wisdom, whatever that's worth, is that if the Democrat Ryan had come within 5 points of Molinaro, that would be considered a bellwether and a good sign for the Democrats going into the fall. Actually, Ryan won by 3 percentage points. And so now what we find ourselves talking about in a broader sense as we look at this year and how it's evolved from a slam dunk big Republican year to a much more competitive season is that there are two groups that we're looking at, or two subdivisions of one group, suburban moms. So on the one hand, and I did not invent these terms, but on one hand, you have the school moms. Mm-hmm. We've talked about them before. They played a pivotal role last year in Virginia and New Jersey. Real visceral anger at government control of education, about their kids being force-fed social emotional learning, critical race theory, that sort of thing. And they're taking their pitched battles to school boards, where they're winning for conservative candidates in school boards all over the country. On the other hand, since mainly the Dobbs decision on abortion and the abortion bans springing up all over the U.S., we're now talking about the pink revolution, and that is suburban moms mainly and younger suburban moms who are in a pitched battle to fight the anti-abortion movement and who have been showing up to vote in very large numbers. The defeat of the abortion ban in an August summer primary in Kansas, where more voters showed up to vote in a Kansas summer primary than showed up in the general election in 2020. And then also Dan Ryan's district. And then you have indications throughout the country of more and younger women who not only are telling pollsters that they're mobilized on this abortion issue, but who are registering to vote in large numbers. So what's going on here, and how ultimately do you think women are going to go? Do you agree that to a great degree, it's going to be women who define this election in November?
Well, they always play a major role. And you've got women in general, and you've got suburban women, and you've got urban women. And so if you say women in general, you're probably going to find a lot of them, over a majority of them, maybe slightly, I don't know the exact number, who are moved by this recent overturning of Roe v. Wade. But to then draw that line to suburban women who we saw in Virginia had righteous anger, and in other, swing states that went Biden, but, either went red or almost went red because of the issues you mentioned: critical race theory, transgender issues in the bathrooms in grade schools, pushing that, and hormone therapy, and if you, laws or potential laws popping up that if you don't support a child as young as whatever 12, 13, then you could get in trouble with CPS or something like that. It's hard for me to see that mobilization that bubbled up in the result of Virginia going back red, then to the recent overturning of Roe v. Wade, to then takes that suburban mother anger and say, well, you know what, actually, my body, my choice is more important than the issues of kids. So for women in general, urban women, I could see where it mobilizes them to say that, well, they got, suburban women in the Democrats' corner because of the overturning of Roe v. Wade. I don't see that straight line. I think I'm not going to downplay the issue for suburban women, but it's hard for me to see them swing that radically with so many issues regarding their children and their schools and their education to abortion. So I think suburban women are a toss-up. I don't think it's a done deal yet.
I don't think it is either, from the vantage point of now. And I think we agree we could have two new lifetimes between now and November 8th.
Yeah.
But from the vantage point of now, what we know is that, number one, once again, that was a bellwether race, Molinaro versus Ryan. The Molinaro focused on what the polling was telling him throughout the campaign was the principal issue: inflation, and the impact inflation was having on families, particularly working families. Ryan focused not almost entirely, but mainly on abortion and abortion rights. And the signal there is that, at least in this instance, in terms of, it was the perfect storm for Ryan. You had gas prices down. You have inflation not growing at the same pace that it had been growing before. You had some Democratic successes in Congress, in a sense that something is getting done. And so this abortion issue turned out to be a great mobilizer. The other thing going on is that just in the parking lot here, I just read a headline in the New York Times, and it said that the Federal Reserve, Powell, just announced that they're going to continue to aggressively fight inflation. That meant to look out for the next wave of interest rates, and he said that he realized rate hikes. Did I miss?
No, you're good. You're good.
And he said that there is going to be pain involved. Now, that's not music to Joe Biden's ears. We're expecting another round of rate hikes, but to have that announced right now at this moment could be troublesome. But what sort of lifetimes can we? What sort of benchmarks could we consider, or should we focus on? But what could happen between now and November?
Well, rate hikes are supposed to be deflationary in nature, right? But what that tells me is that, and I've said this before, I think I even said it during the last podcast, that the Fed is in a major conundrum. And I don't think that they're ever going to really admit that. All one needs to do is see the scattered back and forth and the changing of, the messaging all the way back from inflation was transitory and that was a complete denial of reality to inflation is here. Well, maybe it's here to stay. We're going to rate hikes. All right, we're done. Maybe we're going to start to lower. Well, now we're going to. They are in panic mode.
Yeah.
They are in full-fledged panic mode. Of course, an election is around the corner. This has major implications for elections. So raising rates is deflationary in its nature. But what it tells me that what I think is going on in Powell's head is that the bubble's going to pop as it naturally would with interest rates going up, because how is the government going to pay the interest on the debt, the vast debt, the balance sheet that ballooned up to how many trillions of dollars? How are they going to pay even the interest on the debt with interest rates going up? So when the bubble pricks and pops through interest rates going up, they're going to have to reverse course and they're going to have to lower them again. And that's when inflation, I think, in my opinion, is really going to run rampant, because they're going to lower interest rates again, inflate the money supply more, which is going to raise prices. So that's what they're in. Back to your point in the race, where the Republicans lost because they were focusing on the number one issue of inflation, and the Democratic candidate was focusing on abortion. I think the problem with Republicans, no question about it, inflation is the top issue nationally in poll after poll. I think the problem for Republicans is going to come a point where they rail about inflation, but what are they going to do about it?
That's the issue.
So yes, they can blame Biden as they should, because it wasn't nearly as bad, although Trump certainly played a role in it during the pandemic, increasing the balance sheet by trillions of dollars. But so, okay, we get it. It's Biden inflation, if you want to call it. Biden, the standard of living has gone down excessively under Biden. But what are the Republicans going to do about it? Are they actually going to get a Fed person, a person at the head of the Federal Reserve who is going to reverse course and move away from the status quo? Are they able to do that? Is that even possible? So it becomes an old issue in terms of campaigning, because it starts to reveal, well, what are you going to do about it?
Here's an instance where tax cuts don't work. Tax cuts are inflationary. And you're right. Do the Republicans present a credible alternative, or are they just not the incumbent? I don't know. Before we get into some of your overseas looking back observations, we have a poll coming up, and no details or anything, but why don't you just, the gist of kind of this path-breaking poll on moderates and independents.
Moderates and independents. You look at the news, you read whatever it is, Real Clear Politics, whatever aggregate news site that is a favorite, frequent for political junkies and pundits. And yeah, I think people having a sense of where Hispanics are going, they're going towards Republicans. I think people have a sense that youth, the 18 to 29, are not as enthusiastic about the Democrats, although maybe that's changed with abortion. But two big voting blocs, especially independents, that we know flip elections, they are the deciders, and moderates. Who are they? What do they believe? Do moderates tend more liberal conservative? What are the issues that press them? What are they hot about? What do they think about the state of this country? The same for independents. How are independents going to vote, and on what issues? What candidates are they going to go for regarding going to the polls, and for what issues? Nobody has a command of this. And we're about to have a command of that. And we have co-branded with the world's largest data collector, that is Dynata, who are going to wonderfully provide the sample, and we're drawing up the questionnaire, and we're doing our signature Zogby strategies analysis to tell you who the moderate vote are, who the independent vote are, and how that portends for what is really one of the most exciting midterm elections in recent history.
I'm looking forward to it. I'm looking forward to pouring through the data, and hopefully very soon. I don't know about next week's podcast, but maybe 2 podcasts from now. So, not many Americans, in fact, hardly any Americans, can say what you're about to say, which is, I just returned from a trip to Albania.
From a 2-week trip to Albania and a day layover in Rome.
So talk
with
to me.
3 little ones.
Yeah.
It was a great time. So I'll start with this, and this is really going to tie back to what you just said about the IRS and taxes. It really all ties together. It's a panorama view of my world tour going home. So we came from the Greek-Macedonian border, which is all the way south east of Albania, and went all the way to drove by car to Tirana, to the airport, which is close to the Ionian Sea. And I couldn't help but be struck by the vast difference in wealth. And going from the Greek-Macedonian border and driving through mostly villages that really, the people are friendly and beautiful, but the villages are destitute. The youth are gone. They've gone to the capital city. They've left the country. This is very common in the Balkans and in parts of a lot of Eastern Europe. And then all of a sudden you get to capital city, and the magnificent palace-like hotels that, really look like an even more perverted version of Caligula ordered them to be built. Was just really disgusting. And the sprawling construction projects, and I looked to my wife and I said, this is just a predatorial city that's just usurping the vast resources from the rest of the country into this one area, forcing all the villages in the other cities to send their youth there. And no wonder why families are split up and they have to go there, because all of the wealth has been centralized in this one city, and they benefit, and they largely benefit. And so then we get to Rome, and we arrive in Fiumicino Airport, check in, go get on the train and go straight to the metro, which I would not recommend with 3 little ones. That was like going through Dante's Inferno. We get out of the metro to the stop we want to get to, Flaminio, and arrive at the Piazza del Popolo. And you walk through into this piazza, this public square, and there's an obelisk dedicated to Augustus Caesar, with fountains of lion statues with the water coming out, clear, crystal clear water. We walk through an intimate art lane. I couldn't even imagine how much the art was worth. We get to the Spanish Steps. My kids get to go up the Spanish Steps.
Oh, they did? I didn't know that.
They had a blast with it. And then right there is the entrance of the Villa Borghese, Rome's Central Park. And we're walking up that, and there's Medici's villa. And then we get to the top of it, the high point, and see the whole panorama of Rome. And I just cannot believe the vastness of wealth and what I see. But it makes sense, because this is a 2,500-year-old city, right? They've had time to develop all of this wealth in real estate. And so that makes sense. Tirana didn't make so much sense, being only really 40 years in development. And then I get back to the U.S., and I'm thinking about Washington, D.C., and I'm thinking about our drives and how we go through Route 12 South and go through places in New York State that have seen better days, Oxford, New York, Greene, New York. You could see once were great, but now are suffering, and coal mine country in Pennsylvania that once had strong working classes, blue collars who, did all right for the work that they did, and even former middle class cities like Scranton and Hazleton now suffering. And then all of a sudden you get into Maryland, and it almost seems like the sun is a little bit brighter. And then you get into Washington, D.C., and my God, all of the wealth that has been accumulated. Why do I tell this story? This reconciliation bill is a big thing. And I think people really need to see where all of this is going. As of now, before the reconciliation bill, the IRS collects $4.1 trillion in revenue annually. And now they want to expand the IRS agents and workers by 87,000. Okay. Some of which the job descriptions are to be willing to carry a gun and use deadly force. Now, I don't know when the last time there was somebody who was trying to outrun the tax man in a high-speed chase.
Probably Al Capone, I would think.
Maybe Capone and people like that.
They caught him, incidentally.
Yeah. And he paid dearly for it. But the point is that the politicians who are in favor of this bill will tell you that, well, nobody under $400,000 is really going to feel it. Well, that's not true, because people who make less than $25,000 a year are 5 times more likely to be audited. So what we're seeing here is a gross expansion of what you could say is the imperial city's main arm of collecting wealth from the rest of the country and centralizing it into Washington, D.C. And think about this. Think about the political implications of this. Of course, the IRS is unionized. And so that means all of that, new tax money to go into the IRS for that union to have more money to support their favored Democratic political candidates, potentially. So, I mean, what we see here is an expansion of a city that is already doing extremely well at the expense of the country that is not doing so well, a lot of the country that's not doing so well. And I don't see how this really does well for Biden. That's long story short.
So I like the Tirana part a whole lot more than the U.S. part. First of all, back to Tirana. I remember the New York Times had a 3-part series in the fall of 1999, 8 years after the walls came down, the end of the Soviet Union and the Soviet reach. And there was a series of articles about Albania, about Tirana in particular. And Tirana had been so devastated by Enver Hoxha, their communist leader, that folks were still riding around in horses and buggies and ancient automobiles, and that the actual number one source of income in that city were Ponzi schemes. It had been amazingly backwards, and in the final analysis, what we read in subsequent years was that enormous amount of private investment that went in to catch Tirana up. It was one of the fastest growing cities, not only in the region, but in the world, because it's an important city. And yes, as a result, you're going to have, as you've had from the beginning of mankind, the outflow of people from the villages into cities where the opportunities are. And so just by way of perspective, a lot of money went into Tirana, and you saw that result 20 some odd years later. About the IRS, I'm not a fan. I don't know that anybody necessarily is a fan of the IRS. On the other hand, is it basically fair that you and I pay taxes and that there are others who earn more and pay less? Both sides want to close loopholes. Both sides want to not punish enormous wealth or punish wealth, but at least ensure that there's some fairness in terms of how taxes are collected and distributed. Is there any other way to do it than to hire more agents? I don't know. That the 87,000 new IRS employees makes me wince But then when I think it through, it doesn't bother me so much.
Yeah.
Final word.
Well, Tirana and the backroom deals and the rig contracts is more or less what I'm getting at. And when you described it going from horse and buggy to the city that we know it, I'm also reminded of Washington, D.C., a former backwater with horses and buggies now, by a similar process of, centralization of wealth. But the fact of the matter is, most people would be better off with their own money, whether they're rich or whether they're working class. They would be better off with their own money. And I think they know better what to do with it than an impersonal, non-transparent third party that is the IRS. I do want to mention a shock poll that I think is very important, because this is something that I think is really, the cat is out of the bag and we can't really ignore it much longer. But TIPP,
Yep.
of course,
TIP.
came out with this poll, and TIP is totally legitimate and very accurate.
I'm a big fan.
81% say that they believed the election would have been different had the Hunter Biden laptop story actually come to light, and that it wasn't being misled by the media coverage. Another data point was that almost 75% of Americans say they want a special counsel from the FBI to investigate into the matter. Almost half of voters say that they would have changed their mind had they known that this wasn't just a Russian disinformation story. Many among who were Democrats who would have changed their vote. I don't know whether they would have went Green Party or some other, or just write in some candidate, but that's what they say. And this is something that's been swept under the carpet and has been ignored, and well, that's just disinformation, it's not true. We're coming to find out that the story has legs. And the fact that a major polling institution like this comes out with these numbers saying that Americans are basically convinced, the vast majority of them, that the election would have been different had the reporting been honest and not swept under the rug. I think it's huge. And I think it could potentially have implications for November if the story continues to be investigated into.
Well, if there's a there, then I'll talk about it.
Okay. You'll join the ranks of 81%.
No, I'll join the ranks of talking about it.
Okay.
All right. Take care. Have a good
one.
week, everybody.